I'm going to introduce our legal director, Rebecca Markert. She was FFRF's first attorney, a real find, 2008, and she had worked for Senator Feingold in his Senate office in DC, doing constituency services, and in a sense that's what we really do at FFRF legally as well, and that she decided she wanted to go to law school. So she went to Roger Williams in Rhode Island, and shortly after she graduated, we found her. And she has carved out our legal department, our legal team. There was nothing there, and we now have, is it 10 attorneys? We have lots of, depends on how many legal fellows we have, interns, and Rebecca has managed it all, and of course now we've gone into litigation. It used to all be outside counsel. So I'm going to turn it over to her to introduce her fellow, I guess there's no sister, panel members. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So, my name's Rebecca, like Annie Laurie just said. And before I get started, I get to introduce the rest of the speakers that are up here tonight, or today. So Patrick Elliott is FFRF's senior counsel, and he is the head of our litigation team. He's been with FFRF almost as long as I have, since 2010 when he graduated from law school in Wisconsin. And as a result of graduating from a Wisconsin law school, he didn't have to take the bar exam. But don't worry, he's a quality lawyer. Hold that against him. He's a key member of our team. He oversees our ongoing cases, advises on amicus briefs, and helps to mentor a lot of our younger attorneys. He's also a dad to 2 young boys, Louis and Oscar. Chris Line is with our intake team. He's been with FFRF also for a very long time. He started as an intern when he was in law school at Wisconsin, and then became our Patrick O'Reilly Legal Fellow in 2017 and stayed on as an attorney with our intake team at the end of his fellowship in 2019. He's also an accomplished photographer, so he's not just a lawyer at our organization, he's also our official staff photographer, which is a lot of the reason you don't see him a lot in pictures. And this weekend, obviously, Annie Laurie and Dan had mentioned he's acting as our convention photographer. I'm also going to introduce 2 speakers from our lobbying and strategic response teams. Ryan Jayne was also an intern-extern with FFRF when he was at Lewis and Clark School of Law. In 2015, he became a Diane Uhl Legal Fellow and joined as a staff attorney in 2017. He's currently on our strategic response team and helps to track legislation on the state level, drafts public comment and testimony on policy issues at both the federal and state levels. He's integral to the forthcoming FFRF Action Fund. He's also a dad to 2 little girls, Leona and Zelda, and Leona's artwork is featured on my office door as she recently anointed me the world's greatest boss. So, settled. Mark Dan will close out our presentation. He became FFRF's first full-time Director of Governmental Affairs in 2019 and is based in Washington, D.C. He's also an integral part of FFRF's Action Fund. That will be coming soon. He previously worked as Director of Governmental Affairs for the Secular Coalition for America and was Federal Affairs Director at Compassion and Choices. He and his husband traveled to places that would make everyone in this room jealous. I also want to mention at the outset that we are not taking questions at the end of this presentation. We have an Ask an Attorney event tomorrow afternoon that exists for the sole reason of Q&A, so please hold your questions until that event tomorrow. And thanks in advance for that. So, we'll get started. I don't know, there. So this past year, it's been an extremely trying year, to say the least. It's been really tough to be a civil rights attorney, and especially one who works to keep religion and government separate. You know, over the last few years, we've seen the Supreme Court take more and more religious liberty cases, so we saw this coming. But this summer, we saw an ultra-conservative majority on our court use its own precedent to take away a constitutional right for the first time, to decide to permanently shelve the Lemon Test, which is the analysis by which we evaluate Establishment Clause violations, and further destroy the wall of separation between church and state. Sinful and tyrannical. That's a phrase that you might know from Thomas Jefferson, and he used it to describe a government that compels its citizens to tax a person to fund ideas and beliefs with which they disagree. The idea is that you can't tax a person to fund religious schools and fund those ideas that you don't believe in. But over the last year, this phrase keeps coming back to me as I see what the Supreme Court is doing. The words sinful and tyrannical really describe the court. It's been a hard year, but over the last year, we've also seen reason to hope and reason to not give up the fight. There's increased anger and rage over policies and court decisions, but don't doubt for a second that anger doesn't fuel change. For years, we've seen changing demographics with the nuns on the rise, but this year, we've seen those demographics morph into increased activism. We've seen students walk out of schools protesting anti-LGBTQIA policies and religious indoctrination in places like West Virginia and Oklahoma. More non-believers and religious minorities are speaking out against Christian nationalism and efforts to impose religion in public life. We've seen coalitions built over the last few years, like our Secular Litigators Roundtable, continue to thrive and work better together more than ever before. Polls suggest there's more support for court reform than there's previously been, and our team, this group of attorneys, we resolved not to give up just yet. I heard a lawyer speak recently who said, "We're on the right side of history, and when that's where we are, why would we possibly give up?" We can't let them win. So the team at FFRF will continue fighting for you and for a government free from religion. So Patrick, Chris, and I are here to go over the highlights from this past year, and we definitely have some. And then Ryan and Mark will tell you about our legislative and lobbying efforts. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's happening in-house at FFRF. So the legal staff slide. This is your 2022 legal team. As Annie Laurie mentioned, we have 10 attorneys, including 3 legal fellows and 2 legal assistants. Most of them are here this weekend, so please go and say hello. We welcomed new staff on the legal and strategic response teams. And so I've asked them to come up and wave hello, so as I say their names, they'll wave to you. So Ryan Dudley joined us this fall as the new state advocacy specialist on our SRT team. He graduated from Texas A&M Corpus Christi and got his master's in public policy at DePaul University in Chicago. He's the dad to 2 young children, Cormac and Bennett. Ryan, you can wave. Ryan Jayne's going to talk a little bit more about their work together later. In legal, many of you who were at Boston last year met Stephanie Dyer, who was our intake legal assistant. She left us in the fall for law school. And Matt Langer, who is on the slide on the right, he joined as the new intake legal assistant. He graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a degree in philosophy, but he has spent the last 10 years working in intake and case management for behavioral health institutions in Wisconsin. He's not able to make it this weekend, but he is one of the 2 staffers that you will encounter when you send a state charge complaint to FFRF. Since 2015, we've had a robust legal fellows program where we have recent law school graduates come to work at FFRF for a period of up to 2 years. They get experience as attorneys and also learn more about working to keep religion and government separate before they move on to other areas of the legal profession. In June, we welcomed our 10th legal fellow, Sammy Lawrence. She graduated from UW Law School in May and currently serves as the Anne Nicole Gaylor Fellow. Sammy was previously an intern and extern with FFRF. She's over there. Now you can wave, Sammy. So we usually only have 2 legal fellows at a time at FFRF, but this year we were lucky enough to get a third. In September, we welcomed our very first Equal Justice Works fellow, Kat Grant. Equal Justice Works helps recent law grads design their own fellowship with an organization of their choosing. It's a highly competitive public interest program that's designed to help fulfill our nation's promise of equal justice for all. They select fewer than 100 law students per year. Kat's proposal is to improve the legal landscape for LGBTQIA+ Americans through advocacy based on free exercise in the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. They also were a recent legal intern for FFRF and graduated from Indiana University in May. And Kat's over there. So given the addition of 2 new legal fellows this year, we moved Karen Heineman, who started last year, from our intake team to our litigation team. She was already instrumental in getting a new lawsuit filed this fall, but unfortunately she was not able to be here this year. We continue to have a strong law student internship program. During the summer of 2022, we had 6 law student interns in person for the first time in a couple of years. They're pictured here. Chloe was from the University of Kansas. John was from the University of New Hampshire. Katie, Mallory, Kaylor, and Jeff were all from the University of Wisconsin. And Sarah Weinstock, who's also pictured here on the left, was one of our editorial interns, but she's in there too. And then this fall, we have an extern from Loyola University School of Law in Chicago, Carly, who's pictured there on the right. So now we'll turn to our work to keep state and church separate. There are 3 ways that we do that: through litigation, through advocacy, and through education. Before the pandemic started, we restructured our legal team in large part to deal with the changing legal landscape that we were experiencing and we were further anticipating. To that end, we have a team devoted to non-litigation advocacy efforts, trying to resolve these First Amendment complaints without going to court. We also have our litigation team, which takes lawsuits. And we have a team devoted to what we call legal education. That involves our efforts to educate the general public about the importance of state-church separation, what these violations look like, how they can be resolved, and why. This is an important part, why it is important for them to get resolved. We also have our strategic response team, which will soon be our C4 team. Ryan and Mark will talk about that a little later this afternoon. So we're going to highlight accomplishments from all of these teams, and you're going to hear from all of us. I'm going to start with our education team. Our education attorney is Liz Cavell. She's not able to be here today, so I'm going to talk a lot about a lot of her accomplishments. So as I said, the general idea is that our legal education team is helping to reinvigorate or remind people that state-church separation is a cherished American principle, and that almost every issue they care about most likely has an underlying separation of state and church issue to go along with it. And so there are 3 major initiatives of this team from this past year that I want to highlight for you. So everyone here probably remembers Coach Kennedy. He was a public high school football coach who prayed at the 50-yard line in Bremerton, Washington. This summer, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that his conduct was constitutional. Aside from the outcome of the decision, what's most upsetting about the case is the narrative that was spun and bought by a majority of the court. This narrative focused heavily on the rights of the coach and not on the students. So we wanted to remind the public whose rights were actually violated in this case. So this fall, we launched a multi-pronged campaign in reaction to this decision. Our Know Your Rights campaign included an online Know Your Rights resource webpage and brochure for students, including a digital wallet-size version that's seen here on the left, and a billboard in Bremerton, Washington, wishing Bremerton High School students a safe, secular, and successful school year. That billboard's pictured here on the right. We also have done social media messaging highlighting the impact on students when teachers push religion on them. We also sent letters to school districts in 14 states educating them on the impact of this decision and their obligations to keep students' freedom of conscience intact and free from religious indoctrination. We will continue this campaign as we heard just this week that Coach Kennedy will return to the team in the spring of 2023. We also made it a goal this year for our members, you, to hear more from our attorneys about the work that they're doing. So every month we have attorneys drafting short blog posts about various state church topics, and here are a few that have been highlighted. We have a religious exemption to COVID vaccinations blog, a couple on the Bremerton decision, one on the problem of assemblies put on by religious organizations or persons in public schools, disability rights in the post-Roe America, the intersection of gun rights and state church separation, and thoughts on our newest justice of the Supreme Court, Ketanji Brown Jackson. So, if you will roll my video, Bruce. Welcome back to We Dissent, the podcast with 4 secular women attorneys discussing religious liberty in federal and state courts and our work to keep religion and government separate. I'm Rebecca Markert with the Freedom from Religion Foundation and one of your co-hosts.
And I'm Monica Miller, the legal director and senior counsel at the American Humanist Association and also one of your co-hosts.
I'm Allison Gill with American Atheists and also one of your co-hosts.
And I'm Liz Cavell, counsel at FFRF, and in this episode...
So We Dissent is our biggest accomplishment for the education team this year. I proposed this idea featuring 4 women attorneys from the 3 major secular organizations in the United States. Our podcast, as you just heard, discusses religious liberty issues in state and federal courts and our work to keep religion and government separate. The idea also has the purpose of elevating women's voices in the secular movement and to highlight women lawyers who work on these constitutional issues. Given that all of our organizations were either founded by and or are currently run by women, we thought it was high time to hear more from these women doing this work. Allison, Monica, and Liz were on board right away, and our first episodes dropped in May of 2022. And new episodes are available monthly. The podcast has already had over 10 episodes. We had some shorter emergency episodes to discuss court rulings over the summer. And we, like Annie Laurie mentioned this morning, reached a milestone of 20,000 downloads. This is really significant because we don't really promote the podcast at all outside of our own organization. Our legal assistant, Greta Martins, who's also here today, is key to ensuring the episodes are published and a transcript is made every month. James Fettaplace, our former IT director, was instrumental in designing our webpage, we-dissent.org, and our audio team is Audio for the Arts, which is Buzz Kemper's company. He's in the back, and you saw him this morning. And Maggie, who is helping with sound and staging here today, is one of our engineers as well. So we thank them so much for making us sound really good. Again, it's a monthly podcast, and to our knowledge, the only legal affairs shows for atheists, agnostics, and humanists hosted completely by women lawyers. You can find us wherever you get your favorite podcasts or listen online at wedissent.org, and I hope you do. So now I'll ask Senior Counsel Patrick to come up and highlight our litigation efforts.
Thank you, Rebecca. This is the first time I'm ever going to have to move a microphone up. So it feels, I'm not very tall, so this is great. Hi, everyone. It's always special for us, the attorneys, to come to these events because we feel like rock stars because a lot of our members like us, and that's very rare for an attorney to be well-liked. So thank you all for being so friendly. So as Rebecca said, I'll talk about some of our litigation, so some of our ongoing lawsuits, and I'll kind of give a rundown just on the numbers to start. We have 7 cases that are in progress. 2 of those are wins that I'll talk about. We filed 4 cases, friend of the court briefs or amicus briefs, and then we have 3 new lawsuits that were filed this year. So that's kind of an overview of the last year. And 2 of our wins I think are very interesting cases. One let me see here, being out of West Virginia. Some of you may have heard of this case before because it's been ongoing for a number of years, but we sued on behalf of a family in Mercer County, West Virginia, against the school system for putting on Bible in the Schools classes, which was just blatantly religious education for elementary school students once a week throughout all of the elementary schools. And you can see some of the images that we received from the program. You have one with Moses giving the Ten Commandments, and then the other one is Adam and Eve with a giant dinosaur in the background. So it wasn't just religious instruction, there was creationism instruction, and one of the quotes from one of the lesson plans that we had said, had the class picture Adam being able to crawl up on the back of a dinosaur. He and Eve could have their own personal water slide. So this was really invidious creationism instruction going on in the schools. Our plaintiff, Elizabeth Deal, was the mother of a student who we're calling Jessica, and she originally started out, when the classes started, she had to sit in the back of a classroom, like in a coat room area, but she could still hear what was going on. So finally they moved her out to a separate classroom to sit by herself. This is a student in first grade and second grade, and then eventually in third grade. So you can imagine what it would feel like to be separated from your classmates. And then, of course, other students bullied her, saying that she and her parents were going to hell. So I'm just trying to show what some of the plaintiffs go through in these situations, because there's actual harm when religion's being pushed on young children. Ultimately, she was moved out of that school system and went to a neighboring school system. So we filed that lawsuit in 2017. It took a long time to work its way through the courts. We won an appeal before the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in 2018. And then finally this year, so the school had suspended the classes temporarily. And then finally this year, we have a settlement and agreement that the classes are forever ceased. They're not coming back. The school system agreed to pay $225,000 in attorney's fees to cover our costs and attorney's fees. And I'm happy to announce that Jessica, the student, was awarded the Hermsen Student Activist Award from FFRF with a corresponding scholarship. And our other victory this year also happens to be out of West Virginia. We sued the city of Parkersburg for, at every single meeting, having the Lord's Prayer recited in unison with both city council members and the audience. As you have previously heard, sometimes this can be a difficult issue to litigate, but this was clearly affiliating the government with one religion, Christianity. One of the council members, who you can see pictured on the right, in fact, was quite aggressive. At this particular meeting, he was glaring at attendees who were sitting during the prayer. And then at the end, he goes to push his microphone button to shout "Amen" into the microphone. And so I think of that, and I think of, is this really what Jesus would say, at the Sermon on the Mount, is how we're supposed to say the Lord's Prayer is, stare at your enemies and shout "Amen" at them? This council member, he's a former council member, also was at January 6th and was sentenced to jail for his participation in that. So we filed suit in 2018 with two of our FFRF members, one of whom we're going to be hearing from a little bit later, and we won. The district court this year ruled that this practice violated the Establishment Clause and ordered the city council to stop the practice. And then we also were awarded our attorneys' fees and costs earlier this month, so that was an award of $60,000 for FFRF and our attorneys working on that case. So those are two of our wins, but to go back to our theme of the convention in terms of messing with Texas, we have a case that was filed against this Judge Mack, who is a justice of the peace. We filed suit in 2019 because he would open all of his court sessions with prayer. FFRF attorney Sam Grover is our lead attorney on the case. You'll see him at the convention today. And we sued alongside an anonymous attorney who had to practice in his courtroom. Who basically stopped taking cases because he didn't want to prejudice his clients by not participating or seeming to participate in the prayer practice. We won at the district court level. The court ruled that it was unconstitutional. And then unfortunately, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which oversees Texas, in September, reversed that decision and ruled that this practice was constitutional. In a strong dissent, Judge Grady Jolly wrote that the plaintiffs produced considerable evidence that the practice was coercive. And I think this is quite profound for a judge to say about other judges. Jolly wrote, "For the majority to find that there is no evidence of coercion suggests, in my opinion, willful blindness and indisputable error." And so that opinion has been roundly criticized by law professors and others, but it is one of our Texas cases that we've been fighting for our Texas residents. We have another Texas case which is proceeding in a little bit of a happier manner. This is FFRF sought to put up a Bill of Rights nativity display in December of 2015 and in the Texas Capitol. We had a permit, we had a legislative sponsor. The display was up for 3 years, and then Governor Abbott ordered it removed. He said that it was indecent, mocking, and contributing to public immorality. And so FFRF brought a suit, a free speech suit, which I think was somewhat alluded to by one of our prior speakers today. And in 2018, the district court issued judgment in our favor, saying that this violated free speech to censor that display. However, the state appealed that on technical grounds, saying that the relief granted was improper. Sam argued this case. We won at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, so it went back to the district court. The district court then issued final relief saying practice has to be enjoined, that our display would be permitted, and the governor and the state have appealed again. So that case has been argued before the Fifth Circuit. We're quite optimistic about it, and we expect a decision. It could be, in the next few months, we may get a decision from the Fifth Circuit. So besides taking some of our own cases that I've mentioned, we're involved in other cases because we want to help shape the law in a positive way. We filed 4 amicus briefs this year. One was filed in a Florida case where a Christian school sued to say it had the right to commandeer the public address system to deliver a prayer to start a state championship game. They had lost that case. They're now on appeal before the 11th Circuit, which oversees Florida. Well, I'm optimistic on that case, but there's no telling what our courts will do in that case. The other 3 cases all relate to Supreme Court cases. The one that you probably aren't hearing a lot about now, but it's going to be just like the cake shop, Masterpiece Cake Shop case, is a case called 303 Creative, and that's a case that's before the Supreme Court now. It will be argued in December. We wrote a brief in that case, and that's where a website designer wants to refuse service to same-sex couples. And the state of Colorado did not permit that, and she has sued, and that case has been accepted by the Supreme Court. We also filed briefs in the Coach Kennedy case and the case over the Christian flag flying at Boston City Hall. And I mentioned some of our new lawsuits that were filed this year. This is quite an interesting one. This is also a West Virginia case, and we filed this in February. Some of you may have saw this. This was on the Washington Post and various media sources, but the person on the left, Nick Walker, hosted a revival during the school day at Huntington High School. And some students were forced to attend, and he preached, he prayed, he preached basically a conversion at that moment, that students would be tortured eternally if they didn't turn their lives over to Jesus that day. So there was quite the response, and you can see part of that is from one of our speakers you're going to hear from a little bit later on the right is Max Snybert, who organized a protest and a walkout because of his school's involvement in this religious revival. We are suing on behalf of Max and 3 other families that have been impacted by this revival in the school system, and that case is proceeding. And finally, our latest lawsuit, this was just filed in September against the South Carolina governor and a number of other officials over funding going to an organization called Christian Learning Centers of Greenville County. And I have an image up from their website which kind of shows what they do is they provide religious instruction. It says, bring your Bible, a computer, and you can get credit for attending these classes. They received in the state budget this year $1.5 million to build a new residential school in South Carolina. The problem with that is the South Carolina Constitution is quite strong, and one of the provisions says no state money or credit of the state can go towards private education, so not just religious schools, but also private schools. The governor was sued in 2020 over that and lost before the state Supreme Court, saying that COVID relief funds could not go to private schools, including religious schools. And so we filed on behalf of 3 FFRF members and another state resident to try to block the grant, and that case is also proceeding right now. So that's a sample of our litigation work, and I'll turn it over to Chris Lyon, who can talk about some of FFRF's non-litigation advocacy.
Hi there. We primarily resolve disputes with letters of complaint, phone calls, or even by giving advice to members wishing to pursue matters on their own. Since last year's convention, the legal staff has written 504 letters of complaint on behalf of members like you and achieved roughly 132 significant non-litigation victories. Since January 1st, FFRF has sent more than 390 letters and achieved 87 victories. The intake team regularly answers questions from members and prospective members on issues that do not result in letters of complaint. On a daily basis, we send many letters or emails to and take calls from people concerning state church issues. We also work closely with our chapters to provide information and assist with local efforts to keep state and church separate. On average, FFRF receives 45 new state church complaints on a weekly basis, and so far in 2022, we've received 1,746 contacts detailing potential state church violations. FFRF staff attorneys also send educational letters to government officials. Many times these involve a letter to superintendents, educating them on the state of the law with regard to religion in public schools. So far this year, there have been 2 of these mass mailings. We sent a memo to all 146 school districts in Tennessee, reminding them that Bible distributions are unconstitutional in public schools. And as Rebecca mentioned, we sent a memo to more than 6,100 school districts in the 14 states where we've seen the most violations involving praying coaches or prayer at school sporting events. I wish I had time to share with you the hundreds of complaints we send this year and all the victories as well, but I can highlight some notable ones and some notable victories from throughout the past year. So, as you know, we're not afraid of messing with Texas. So let me start off with a victory from right here. In August, a Concerned Friendship ISD employee reported the district hosted a sectarian prayer during its mandatory in-service training for staff. Our complainant is a Christian, but they did not feel comfortable participating in the prayer, so they just silently and respectfully observed while the prayer took place. A district administrator actually noticed that our complainant did not bow their head or say amen and confronted them. Our complainant was rightfully afraid that they might be subject to retaliatory employment action because they did not participate in the prayer. Our legal fellow, Sammy Lawrence, wrote to the district asking they immediately cease praying at staff events. Less than a month later, we received a response from the district's legal counsel informing us that staff in services would no longer include prayer in the future. As you know, FFRF is a registered 501c3, and we take this designation, along with the accompanying benefits and responsibilities, very seriously. Unfortunately, we're continuing to see a rise in churches making a mockery of their 501c3 status by reaping all the benefits while openly engaging in politics and endorsing political candidates. Here's a photo of Ted Cruz at an event in Ohio. This year, we reported dozens of churches to the IRS for illegal electioneering. Most of these cases were handled by our talented intake attorney, Maddie Ziegler, including an egregious violation from earlier this year committed by Greg Locke of Global Vision Bible Church. We have a video clip.
I'm to the place right now, if you vote Democrat, I don't even want you around this church. You can get out. You can get out, you demon. You can get out, you baby butchering election thief. You cannot be a Christian and vote Democrat in this nation. I don't care how mad that makes you. You get pissed off as you want to. You cannot be a Christian and vote Democrat in this nation. They are God-denying demons that butcher babies and hate this nation. They hate this nation. Get mad all you want to. I don't care if you stand. I don't care if you throw tomatoes, praise God. I'm about to throw a microphone up in his house. CNN can eat my dirty socks. You cannot be a Democrat and a Christian. You cannot. Somebody say amen. The rest of you, get out. Get out. Get out in the name of Jesus.
Locke's aggressive message is illegal electioneering, and we ask the IRS to revoke the tax-exempt status of his church and all other churches that are doing things that's violating the law. Here's another example of us messing with Texas. In April, a teacher at Figueroa High School brought in Time to Revive, a religious ministry, to preach and proselytize to students. They handed out Bibles, and they attempted faith healings and prayed over students. The local news ran a story regarding the event featuring one of our brilliant attorneys. We have a clip.
Attempted faith healings, prayers for the students, Bibles, and multicolored bracelets are some of the activities and objects given to students by the group Time to Revive, an evangelical ministry from North Texas. The visit happened early in April at Cigarroa High School. A TikTok video was made of the visit. In it, students claim preachers told them if they don't pray hard enough, they were going to, quote, to hell. Although this visit caught the attention of parents and the community, a national organization took matters into their own hands. Freedom from Religion Foundation, or FFRF, a nonprofit group that works to protect the Constitution principle of separation between state and church, says the religious group's visit is troubling. They say students must have their own self-religious thought on campus.
Knowing that, if students are able to grow up in an environment where they can think freely and, use reason and logic and explore things and learn, if they're not indoctrinated into a religion at a young age, they typically never become religious.
The organization's attorney, Chris Line, says they have sent a letter to the district to investigate this claim.
If a school is continuing to promote and endorse religion, to bring in preachers and to use the school resources to push Christianity, then any student or parent could file a lawsuit at any time.
In the letter FFRF sent to LISD, it reads in part, public schools are not an appropriate place for outside adults to convince students to convert to their beliefs or attend their church. We reached out to LISD about the visit, who addressed it immediately in a statement by saying, the district respects the individual students' rights to religious expression, but recognizes that compelling students to gather for any religious expressions does not align with their current policies or practices. KGNS also reached out to Time to Revive for a comment on the visit, but have yet to hear back.
As you heard in the clip, the district has made clear that this won't be allowed to happen again in the future. Both before and after the Bremerton decision, FFRF has been receiving bizarre and alarming complaints about teachers and coaches using their position to indoctrinate students. I'm going to highlight two particularly egregious cases for you. A concerned student reported Mrs. Cook, a biology teacher in Tulsa Public Schools, had been abusing her position and proselytizing to students. She set up a prayer room in the back of her classroom where students could go and pray. When our complainant placed a non-Christian prayer in the room, Ms. Cook pulled them out of class and berated them for not being a Christian. Mrs. Cook told our complainant if they did not repent, they would burn in hell, and that she was required to intervene as a good Christian. She also wrote a blog where she advocated for teachers to use their position to push religion, even if it meant losing their job. She had dozens of posts similar to this one. If every Christian teacher decided to say no, no more, Satan is not welcome here, imagine how loud our battle cry would be and how quickly the enemy would rush to shadows to cower. He's already so afraid of us. Why else would he choose the youngest and most vulnerable of us for his dastardly plans? He knows he's no match for an army of teachers covered by Jesus' blood. We were very happy to see that just like in Cabo County, where we eventually filed suit, students had enough and started protesting. It made the local news, and we have a clip.
Memorial High School junior Savannah Durbin shot this video of about 50 students who walked out of class.
We all were yelling to fire her and to get her out of the school.
It all started when students staged a protest for women's rights. Students say a Facebook post made afterwards by the teacher circulated through social media.
And went on to say that she was not going to sit here and let these liberal adults condone the violent and evil movement that we were supporting.
Durbin says it's the comments that teacher Amy Cook has made to students' faces that make them feel unsafe at school.
She has a prayer wall in her room with Bible quotes all over it.
Durbin says when a student put something Cook deemed non-Christian on the wall, Cook said,
the person that put it up there should go to hell. And that any student that is gay or any part of the LGBTQ plus community should go burn in hell, basically, is what she has said to students' faces.
Cook is listed as a science teacher on Memorial's website and has her own website as a 2022 Republican candidate for Oklahoma Senate District 34.
The district's attorneys spent months investigating our allegations and claim they've taken some corrective action, but are not able to tell us what it is. So we're continuing to monitor the situation with our local complainant to ensure that she knocks this stuff off. We learned about a similar occurrence in Gwinnett County Public Schools in Georgia. Jenny Savoy, a reading enrichment teacher at Richards Middle School, has been using her position to convert students to Christianity. She organizes and runs a religious club at the school and has been specifically targeting one student for indoctrination and grooming her. She wrote in a Facebook post bragging about this. "Let me remind you how cool God is. There's a girl in my class who I believe by the end of the year will give her heart to Jesus. She claims to be agnostic. Last week I invited her to come to Surge, the before-school Christian club, because I was speaking. She came. Not only that, she came again this week. We talked a while and I prayed for her. The Holy Spirit led me to share my story with her. I invited her to come to my classroom today during my lunch period. I don't have students at that time. She came and I shared what I was like at her age and how desperately I needed Jesus. She could relate to so much of my story. If that wasn't cool enough for you, I took her to the faculty vending machine to get a snack. Every time she put the last 2 coins in, the machine would spit them back out. She must have tried 5 times. I tried 2 more. Then I placed my hand on the machine and said, 'Jesus, please make this machine accept our money.' She laughed, but I also saw curiosity in her face. I said, 'I'm serious. He'll do this just to show you he's real. He cares about you.' After I prayed, she put the coins in, and guess what happened? I wish you could have seen her eyes. She was utterly amazed. I'm not sure that really happened. A week later, Miss Savoy posted an update. I gave my 8th grader a Bible and journal today. I can't wait to see what God does in her life. Keep praying for her, please." We've asked that the district immediately fire Miss Savoy because she has demonstrated she's not willing to put her students and her secular position ahead of her desire to proselytize and push her personal religious beliefs. We're continuing to pursue this matter, and we're hoping to get in touch with the parents so that we can make sure this doesn't happen anymore. They definitely need to fire her. In September, we were contacted by a concerned staff member at East Paris High School in Louisiana after they put on a Day of Hope event through a local religious group. It was advertised as a career fair for seniors, but more than 2,000 students were bused to a church, Living Faith Christian Center, where they were separated by sex. Speakers talked to female students about forgiving their rapists, modesty and abstinence, and male students were encouraged to take part in push-up competitions for money. I think that has to do with Hector's talk earlier. But at least one transgender student who identified as male was prevented from leaving the female group. Other students were reported being bullied. The event caused a lot of outrage in the community and online, prompting responses from FFRF, the ACLU, and other secular groups. And we have another video clip about that event.
The East Baton Rouge School District is doubling down in its defense of the Day of Hope as criticisms pour in about what happened there. The event was advertised as a career fair.
So Day of Hope started approximately 6 years ago, where we bring students from all over the parish and sometimes all over the state.
A Day of Hope where students across East Baton Rouge Parish could map out their next steps. But while some enjoyed the event, others who showed up say it was a lot different than what they were told.
It was really deceitful, and if it would have been executed a bit better, I feel like it would have been a great experience for others. But
Colton Bryant is a student at Woodlawn and says he was not prepared for some of the topics that were discussed at the day-long event, including suicide and sex. On top of that, there was also religion involved.
the fact that they didn't tell us that it was going to be in a church, while students from my school are Muslim and they're coming to this event, I'm sure a bunch of students were uncomfortable and not ready for this.
A spokesperson for the school system tells the 9 News investigators it was not a religious event and that all the prayers and topics that were discussed were student-led and in the moment. But one student we spoke with says that's not true.
No, not at all. They had 3 guest speakers, one for abstinence, one for like the bullying and self-harm, and the other one was about forgiving the abuser. Those were women were talking about their experiences and were telling them in extreme detail.
Kat Grant, our newest legal fellow, wrote to the district and noted, "It's an egregious abuse of government power to proselytize a captive audience in this manner. No public school should dictate what religion to believe in or not believe in. We'll continue pursuing this matter to ensure it does not take place again in the future." A local citizen reported concerns about endorsement of Christianity on the official Cookeville Regional Medical Center Facebook page in Tennessee. The center posted a prayer for frontline workers, and this post that advised, "Jesus and germs are everywhere. When in Cookeville Regional, say your prayers and wear your mask." I didn't know the mask could keep you safe from Jesus, but I'm glad that Karen Heineman, one of our legal fellows, who's herself a medical professional, a veterinarian, wrote to the center. Its legal counsel informed us that the postings had been removed shortly after they received our letter. All right, last one. In August, it was brought to our attention that the dress code for several schools in Hayes USD 489 in Kansas discriminated against minority religions by prohibiting clothing with direct or indirect references to Satanism. A concerned mother bravely spoke in front of the school board regarding her concerns. We have a clip of her speech.
I'm also a longtime member of the Satanic Temple. I raise my children according to the 7 tenets of Satanism, and while children of other faiths can wear clothing that declare their family's religion, my family's faith is specifically called out and banned in the school handbook dress code. Your own non-discrimination policy states that you do not discriminate against students based on religion. Your own mission says every student in every classroom every day. The Satanic Temple has been a federally recognized church for many years now. Banning Satanic students from wearing clothing that declares their faith while allowing students of all other faiths to wear similar clothing is an act of discrimination. So I'm here to ask that the school board remove Satanism from their dress code policy and that they no longer blacklist my family's faith and the faith of other families here in Hayes as distracting, unsafe, or offensive.
Despite that compelling testimony, the board voted 5-2 to continue violating the constitutional rights of its students. We immediately got in touch with the mother in the Satanic Temple, started preparing for a lawsuit. We wrote to the board informing them Satanism is a religion, and students cannot be singled out for punishment or ridicule for expressing religious or non-religious viewpoints in the public schools. The district impermissibly discriminates on the basis of religion and violates the free speech rights of its students when it prohibits certain viewpoints. Under the threat of legal action from FFRF, the board changed its position and voted 6-1 to repeal the prohibition. And now I'll hand things off to Ryan Jayne to talk about our strategic response team.
Thank you, Chris. How's everyone doing out there? All right. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about our SRT team. And we're in kind of a transitionary phase. As has been mentioned a couple times, we're forming a new C4, the FFRF Action Fund. So we're going to be kind of reevaluating how we're dividing up our duties. But for the time being, the SRT team has this sort of grab bag of things that we work on. So we handle rapid response issues. When something pops up that needs some sort of immediate action, whether it's a legal letter or a statement, we'll usually take care of drafting those. We handle some education matters, getting the word out there, educating the public. We try to work with local advocates to keep them active. And then we also do a lot of work on legislation, both at the state and the federal level. To give you an idea of some of the work that we've been doing, just since the beginning of the year, we've written 35 statements for FFRF, 41 rapid letters that we've gotten out, and then 44 letters apart from that that went to our secular legislative allies with model legislation that we are already meeting with them to discuss. So we have plans for next session of good proactive legislation we can help them advance at the state level. 22 press releases, and then 6 articles that we've written on various topics. Another thing that we focus on is regulation, and I think this is a topic that is easily passed over because this is, it can sound kind of boring when you talk about regulatory comments, kind of like, oh gosh, this is what I don't like about lawyers, right? But it's actually a really valuable aspect of how you can get involved as advocates. Basically, the executive branch of the federal and state governments have a great deal of rulemaking power that include these opportunities for comments. And so we as an organization will get involved and comment on what rules we think are good or bad, and then we also encourage our activists to do the same. One example that we worked on this year, not too long ago, involved Title IX. So this is a law that involves sex discrimination in public education. And the Biden administration had a rule that they promulgated that said that sex discrimination includes discrimination against trans students. So things like prohibiting trans girls from playing on K through 12 soccer teams would be sex discrimination under Title IX. That's just one example of what the rule did, but it was a good rule. There was lots of good aspects to it, so we weighed in, said this is good. And this is a good opportunity to also mention our watchdog function. So something that I've been engaged in for the last several years is when there is some sort of government activity going on that it's not an immediate state church violation, but it's suspect. We have to keep an eye on it because it could turn into one at any moment. I join in so that I can listen, see what's going on, and see if it turns into a rapid response sort of situation. And one of those was when we had President Trump. He had Pastor Paula White in the White House leading the White House's faith-based operations. And she had weekly calls where she would have pastors from all over the country call in, and she would basically give them marching orders saying, hey, here's what the White House is doing, and here's what you all should do with your churches. So I joined the mailing list and just kind of, shut my eyes and said, all right, and I think I signed off, God bless, so that they wouldn't catch on, but they let me in. So these are actually they have ongoing weekly calls and other mailing send-outs that I'm still keeping an eye on, and one of them was about these Title IX regulations. So Pastor Paula White was encouraging people to get active and to, of course, oppose these rules because they're good rules. She doesn't like them. So they were bragging that they got more than 1,000 comments in opposition to these rules, which is, that is definitely something. But I'm proud to say that with our new system of allowing our advocates to submit regulatory comments of their own, FFRF alone was able to generate more than 2,000 comments in support of the rule. Now, you've heard so far a lot about our work on litigation and on letter writing, and these are obviously crucial areas that we're going to continue fighting for. And the federal realm that Mark's going to talk about next is also totally crucial, wide-reaching. But I want to explain a little bit about why I think people should focus more on state-level and local-level advocacy. As we all know, the Supreme Court is hostile to actual religious liberty, to put it mildly. So the state of the courts is not great. It's not meaning we're going to give up, but it's fair to predict that things are going to get worse before they get better in terms of the U.S. Supreme Court, at least. Also, of course, the federal U.S. Congress is notoriously bad at getting anything done. Things are just very tricky to get through the U.S. Senate in particular right now. So there's a lot of fruitful opportunity at the state level where there are tons of state legislatures that are able to actually get good things done, or there are bad things that you can actively stop. You have outsized significance at the state level. So if you're not actively talking to your state reps, please do that. All right, everyone in this room, you are superstar advocates. You are way more informed and more involved already than the vast majority of the population. So if you're not plugged in at this level, please consider doing so. A lot of what we do is oops, skipped a slide, but that's okay. So a lot of what we do is tracking legislative activities. There we go, where we are looking at bills on the state level, like I said. So this year so far, we're tracking more than 800 bills. We've analyzed another 500 bills on top of that. And these are mostly bad bills. You can see the ratio on your screen. So a lot of this is defensive work. But the good news there is that the passage rate is pretty similar between bad and good bills. They're both around 8 to 9%. So it's a lot of work to just keep track of all of these, flag them when they come up, analyze them, and then keep people active when things pop up. But that's a big part of what we do on SRT. Now, the process of actually getting activists to participate in this, especially when it's atheists, trying to get them all to get aligned and do something, we always think about this as it's kind of like a continuous herding of cats. It's a little bit tricky sometimes, but we have, I think, done a tremendous work as an organization to get people active in this way. So we, this year, introduced a new system for our action alerts as well. Can I get a quick round of applause from anyone who's used our new system? All right. That's pretty good. Those of you who haven't, because that wasn't everybody, if you want to, just come find me later on. I can help you get signed up. It's really easy, and that way you'll get alerts when it's time. So a lot of times this is stuff like, hey, there's a committee hearing tomorrow on this bill that's important. Click here, and it'll send an email to your rep and tell them what you think about it, or better yet, show up and testify if you're a superstar. But this year with our new system already, we've done 63 action alerts, connecting 21,000 advocates to produce more than 37,000 connections. And that's growing every day. People are joining the system. I think it's pretty good. To give an idea of some of the trends that we've seen and what we expect to see with the new legislative session next year, a lot of you, I'm sure, remember Project Blitz. It's something we've been talking about for years. I'm happy to report that most of the Project Blitz bills this last session did not pass. I think that's in large part due to the secular movement pointing out how monstrous these bills are and how they're linked to Christian nationalism, so they become toxic, which is wonderful. That's what we want. So a lot of these bills, even in places where you'd think they might pass, have been failing. The same was true this last year for expansion of private school voucher efforts. This is an assault on our public schools and an attempt to get taxpayer money into religious education in private schools. And we were actually expecting a pretty fierce assault in this direction this last session and didn't see too much of it. I think they got distracted by some of the other issues, but especially with a bad Supreme Court case on this topic called Carson v. Macon that came out recently. I think we can count on that coming up next year a lot. So that's an issue that if it's not on your radar, you should try to get it there. But not all the bills that we follow are bad. We also try to make an active effort to push good bills. I mentioned that we sent model legislation to 44 of our allies recently, and we're looking at opportunities where we can introduce, if possible, bipartisan legislation in states that have bills that ought to be passed. To give one example, New York earlier this year passed a law that requires criminal defendants to be informed of secular alternatives to 12-step programs. Yeah, it's a really good bill. And so we are hoping to emulate that in other states, because most states have some sort of program where if you go to some sort of treatment program, you can get a reduction in your sentence in many cases. And a lot of judges, it's just a matter that they don't know. If you're there and it's alcohol related, they think of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they don't think that, oh, of course, there's other programs that might be a better fit for some people. So that's just one example. Now, we also, as I mentioned, do a lot of education. We try to connect with local advocates. So here's a picture of me in Iowa earlier this year, if I can make it pop up. Oh, it's being sluggish. Well, you will see a picture of me in Iowa, there we go, and a picture of Chris in Naperville. So yes, I talked to some people who were at that wonderful event with me there. One of our goals on the team is to work more with local chapters and local activists. And I already know a lot of you, but if you're part of a chapter and you want to work more with national, or if you want to get more involved yourself at the local and state level, come find me after this and we'll chat and get you connected. Another big thing that we did this year is an event called the Legislative Summit for the National Conference of State Legislatures. And this is an event that was in Denver this year, where we went. It was our first time going, but we connected with hundreds of state-level legislators who were there to talk about the issues that we think are important, all the stuff I was just talking about, what sort of stuff they can expect in the next session. So we made a lot of good connections, just getting lunches and networking with these various like-minded legislators. And then we also managed to connect with Ryan Dudley, who Rebecca mentioned earlier is the newest staff member to join the SRT team. And he was living in Madison, but was at the event and found me and expressed his strong support for FFRF's mission. And so when I heard he was in Madison, I said, oh, hey, you should stop by the office sometime. And so he did. And I gave him a quick tour, figuring it would just be, oh, thanks for stopping by, talk to you later. But when we got to talking, I realized pretty quickly that we have a superstar on our hands here, and he happened to be between jobs. So as soon as he left, I went and talked to the powers that be and said, we got to get this guy a job offer. So we offered him a job quickly, and he took it. So we are thrilled to have him, and he's already exceeding all of our expectations and doing rock star work. So finally, I just want to say that a lot of the work that SRT does is necessarily behind the scenes because our congressional allies rely on our discretion. But you should know that we are always there fighting for you, monitoring developments for rapid response actions, influencing public opinion, and coordinating with legislative offices, other secular groups, and FFRF chapters to keep our government secular. Up next, I'm going to introduce our Director of Governmental Affairs, Mark Dann, to talk about some of the issues that we can talk about.
All right, how you all doing? Great, great. Okay. So to begin, this has been the 117th Congress has been pivotal for us. So on January 5th, 2021, we knew what we wanted to do. We knew where we were going in Congress. We knew we would be supporting the Do No Harm Act. We knew we'd be supporting the Equality Act. We knew we'd be supporting the Every Child Deserves a Family Act. Of course, we'd be working on the Thomas Paine Memorial. And of course, we'd be building and strengthening the Congressional Free Thought Caucus. But we all know what happened.
Your name. Amen. Amen. Let's all say a prayer in this sacred space. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for gracing us with this opportunity. Thank you. Let me take it back. Thank you, Heavenly Father. Amen. For this opportunity to stand up for our God-given unalienable rights. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for giving the inspiration needed to these police officers to allow us in this building, to allow us to exercise our rights, to allow us to send a message to all the tyrants, the communists, and the globalists, that this is our nation, not theirs.
Our nation, not theirs. Who do you think they were talking about? So we quickly got to work and we reoriented our entire focus to go after white Christian nationalism, and we meant it. We got to work and we started to engage our religious allies, our secular partners, plus key allies and key committees on the Hill. And you're going to see a lot of the work we have done over the past 2 years to really have an impact on going up against white Christian nationalism. So in terms of working, we started to engage our partners. And one of our best partners is our friends at the Baptist Joint Committee. They're they're Baptists, and continuing the great Baptist tradition of supporting separation of church and state, they adhere to those principles. So that's Amanda Tyler. And what they put together, and this was even before January 6th, is Christians Against Christian Nationalism. And they're an extraordinary partner with us. And So we started moving forward with that. And one of the things we did together is we produced a fantastic report. And the report, it's a combination of, it's a work between FFRF and also Baptist Joint Committee. Andrew Seidel did an excellent job of gathering authors and working with Amanda Tyler on editing it, and it was a really big lift. And we cannot thank the authors enough for their work. So Sam Perry and Andrew Whitehead, Dr. Jamar Tisby, Dr. Anthea Butler, Catherine Stewart, Andrew Seidel, and Amanda Tyler. And also we'll be hearing from Dr. Butler coming up a little later in the conference, and that's going to be a fantastic speech. To roll it out, we had a public briefing, and for our report, we had a public briefing on to bring more people in and let them know what was happening. But we also did a behind-the-scenes briefing with members of Congress, and about 7 members of Congress tuned in and joined, and we also have a clip from Representative Jamie Raskin when he presented at that meeting.
Christian nationalism was clearly figured highly in the events of the day, and we're going to figure out exactly what its role was from this report, and it was certainly a unifying theme for many of the factions that assembled on January 6th. More than a year later, Christian nationalists continue to join forces to try to challenge our democratic institutions and values, whether it's in the suppression of voting rights or the promotion of various culture war battles, including, to my mind, the utterly fraudulent attack on critical race theory.
So going back, that was really big news, and the Washington Post picked up on that briefing. So there's a little axiom in DC that if you're not in the Washington Post, you're not being talked about on the Hill. Well, guess what? We got in the Washington Post. And also, as a shout out to our friends from Huntington, West Virginia, guess what? When they got in the Washington Post, the Hill pays attention. So want to get on the Hill's radar? Get in the Washington Post. And so the virtual briefing, as Michelle Goldberg wrote about it, which was not open to members of the public and included more than 50 members, staff, and experts, focused on a new 66-page report about the role of Christian nationalism and the Capitol attack, and on its implications for the future of democracy. So we gained more support, and this led to this speech on the House floor.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to bring attention to a dangerous ideology threatening our democracy: white Christian nationalism. Most members of Congress don't even know what it means, but experts from the Freedom from Religion Foundation and the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty have studied it for years, and their new report shows this movement was at the heart of the January 6th insurrection. White Christian nationalism fuses Christianity with a rigid view of civic life, a view that true Americans are white, native-born, and conservative. On January 6th, it was the connective tissue that tied disparate groups together and propelled them to action. It's infecting our government, from members of Congress and top officials in the previous administration to the wife of a Supreme Court justice whose messages to the president's chief of staff leading up to the insurrection smacked of white Christian nationalism. Thankfully, good Americans, people of faith and non-believers, are standing up to this violent ideology. I call on members of Congress to educate themselves about white Christian nationalism and reaffirm the separation of church and state. I yield back.
And of course, that was Representative Jared Huffman from California, the co-founder and co-chair of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, who we'll be hearing more from later in the conference. And then all of that, the report, the public positions, the articles, the briefings, it got the attention of the January 6th committee. How many of y'all have been watching the January 6th hearings? Okay. You know the January 6th committee doesn't do anything by accident, so this was the victory.
And these are some of the things that they were saying there at the plaza, just blocks from where the president sat that evening, excited for the next day.
This is nothing less than an epic struggle for the future of this country between dark and light, between the godly and the godless, between good and evil. And we will win this fight or America would step off into 1,000 years of darkness.
So now, what the January 6th committee did is everyone knows about white Christian nationalism. They know where it's coming from. It has a face. It's not some weird concept. So more and more Americans are understanding this threat, and we owe the January 6th committee a huge debt of gratitude. So we've been asked to work on two key parts. So first one is healthcare sharing ministries. Raise a quick hand if you're familiar with healthcare sharing ministries. Okay, so very quickly, picture an insurance company that doesn't have to pay out for, can pay out benefits whenever it wants, doesn't have to have a certain capital reserve, can hide behind a religious exemption. That's a healthcare sharing ministry. And about 1.7 million Americans subscribe to a healthcare sharing ministry. You may have also seen a special on John Oliver about this, and that got the attention of Representative Huffman. So Representative Huffman sent a note to the FTC with several members of Congress saying, perhaps you should regulate something. This is a big concern. People are being duped. They think they're buying actual insurance. This is not okay. And then, so we have a clip of Representative Huffman talking about this on Free Thought Matters.
Representative Huffman, you and Representatives Jamie Raskin, Mark Pocan, Eleanor Holmes Norton are asking the Federal Trade Commission Bureau of Consumer Protection to investigate the healthcare sharing ministries, or is there more to it?
No, that it starts with an investigation from the consumer protection perspective. There could be more to it, though.
There could be more to it. So Representative Huffman, he's asked the Federal Trade Commission to take actions. So now the Congress is going to take action, and that's exactly what he did. So he introduced a bill to protect consumers from dangerous healthcare sharing ministries. This is the first bill of hopefully many that FFRF and the secular community has been asked to lead on. This is our bill. So Dan was quoted as Representative Huffman is a true leader in the free thought community and for all consumers. I couldn't agree more. And so we're working with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So there's about 20 some odd organizations, a lot from the healthcare community as well as the secular community that is moving this one forward. And we're going to be putting on more co-sponsors and getting this into the mainstream discussion. Again, we're pushing back against Christian nationalism where we can, and this is in healthcare. All right. Christian nationalism, we've been talking a lot about impact in the courts. Well, guess what? Representative Hank Johnson, who is a member of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, put forward a bill that said, you know what? The pain will not stop until we change the dynamic of the Supreme Court. He put a Supreme Court expansion bill. We're one of the primary organizations that are supporting it. So this is a quote we got from Annie Laurie into the press release on it. And her press comments were with really big hitters on judicial reform and great partners of ours like Alliance for Justice and Demand Justice. So these are part of the actions we're moving forward, as well as a court reform package. And of course, Thomas Paine. So this is great. So this is our second bill this Congress that we've been asked to lead on. And as you can see, one of the things that's great about Thomas Paine, amongst many, is yes, we're pushing back against Christian nationalism, but we also want to be able to bring people into our movement. And building a memorial to Thomas Paine is an excellent way to do that. So as you can see, we started early. This is from a fantastic Secular Coalition for America, the image on the right, meeting when we started leading up on that idea. And then other image, we've got great folks like Markert Downey, Zenos Ferdakis, Dan and Annie Laurie, Andrew. That's when he really kind of bit on the idea and said, okay, we're going with this. As you can tell, we weren't wearing masks, so this was before COVID. COVID hit, so it did delay us a little bit. But we are moving and grooving on this. So Representative Raskin introduces legislation to build a memorial to Thomas Paine. And we're doing really well with it. And also great folks like Robin Blumner from the Center for Inquiry, other good friends, Markert Downey, founder and president of the Free Thought Society, as well as kind of the connective tissue for the Thomas Paine Memorial Association, have been right there. And of course, hit the hill lobbying. And so this is a quick shot of some of our friends who have been lobbying. So definite thank you from Scott McConomy with the Secular Coalition from America, Mandisa Thomas and Charis Howard, who often join these meetings to talk about support from an African-American perspective, Aaron Lewis and Kristen Manna, support from a women's perspective, and Payne as a great believer in humanity, Gene Smith and Jesse Ramsaran as support from a veteran's perspective, Barbara Stocker, who's here today, support from a scientific perspective, and Peter Koo, the California GOP vice chair, is also with us, and our own Karen Hyman, who are giving us the conservative perspective. So it's a very broad coalition, not just of atheists, free thinkers, and agnostics, but you got a lot of folks who are seeing the value in this. And part of the ways we have to do it, so to get a memorial in DC, you have to get a bill through Congress, and then you have to work with a gauntlet of commissions to get it established. It's not an easy lift at all. So there's one thing called the National Area Memorial Advisory Commission, NCMAC, and you have to go before NCMAC to get the blessing of the Department of Interior. And if it doesn't work, you're in trouble. So we gathered our friends and allies. We got a letter from Representative Raskin, and there's a few names on there that are really important. So Representative Olbernolte, Republican from California, he was our first GOP sponsor, and then of course Representative Holmes Norton, who gives us the de facto support of DC. We went into NCMAC, and it was a great effort. So a lot of people I mentioned presented, talked about why Thomas Paine is important to them, and we got this. We won. So. And my favorite quote in the letter is, commissions generally voice surprise that the commemorative work to honor Thomas Paine has not already been established in Washington, D.C. So they agree with us. And then we got more support. We have Representative Sparks from Indiana, Republican, very conservative, who's now the joint sponsor on this. So absolutely a very bipartisan effort, and I think there's a very good chance we can get this out of committee. National Prayer Breakfast. This has been a hard one, but you may have read that it paid a lot of attention it got attention in the Russian influencing campaign with Maria Butina. More articles started coming out about it. Jeff Charlotte, who presented with us the documentary, more momentum started building into opposing this. And so you can see Tim Kaine dropped out of the prayer breakfast, and a lot more people on the Democratic caucus are rethinking this one. And there was definitely one very, very prominent Democrat who was not at last year's prayer breakfast. I'll give you a hint. Obviously, we wish Nancy Pelosi's husband a very speedy recovery, and it does remind us that there are some very hard and rough people out there, and so we wish them a speedy recovery, and certainly we're thinking about them very much today. So next year, what we're going to be doing, no matter what happens next week, we're looking good. So if you look at our portfolio, we're very well balanced. We have bipartisan efforts like the Thomas Paine bill that's bringing in a coalition. We have judicial reform that would get the support of most members of the Democratic caucus today. And we have forward-thinking items such as healthcare sharing ministries and also court expansion. So now what happens? We'll probably launch our C4 sometime next year. Raise your hand if you're familiar with C3, C4. Okay, so C3, FFRF is a C3. You donate to us, you get a tax deduction, and it's fantastic. C4, we can do more politically. So look for that. We'll be expanding the number of allies who are standing up to Christian nationalism. And then, of course, we'll be working with the Department of Justice to work with more of their efforts to go after white supremacy, Department of Education to enforce the Johnson Amendment, and more. So we're going to have, no matter what happens, we're going to have a very active 118th Congress. And thank you so much for all of your support. And we're fighting for you. So thank you.